Hello, everybody. My name is Ned Dennison. I'm the chairperson of the International Marathon Swimming Hall of Fame. We have an interesting guest with us today. Ernie, can I ask you to introduce yourself, please?
Hi, my name's Ernie Hoftyzer, and I live in Davis, California.
One of the reasons we wanted to talk to Ernie is this whole concept of triggers. What causes somebody to go and do these marathon swims? And certainly as a child, I remember seeing the Gertrude Ederle ticker tape parade any number of times. Didn't mean anything to me, but it stuck in my head. And then in 2004 or so, I called somebody in Ireland and they was running an 8 mile swim, and I tried to get in it. He said, "No, we already had it, but next year we're putting 5 sets of relay teams in the English Channel. Are you interested?" And I went, "Yes," and it was the trigger. So Ernie, what I want to do is I want to talk to you about a little bit about your background, and then come to that trigger. So tell us a little bit about your swimming, where you learned. Was it in a pool? Who taught you?
Sure. I grew up in Los Angeles and learned to swim in actually a neighborhood pool. There was probably a neighborhood instructor who taught me and my brother at the same time. And when I was 6 or 7 years old, my parents bought a house that had a pool. So I think that accelerated the whole family's kind of swimming experience. And my sister joined a swim team. My sister's 6 years older than me. She joined a swim team when she was in seventh grade. And then when I got to seventh grade, I joined the same YMCA swim team. And I swam Y swimming and then high school swimming for 6 years from that point. I dropped off a little in eighth and ninth grade, and then I came back to it in 10th grade.
And then you have an interesting story about going off to Catalina at about age 15 or 16. Tell us about the story and who you met there.
Yeah, so I was a Boy Scout for many years, and the first time I went to Emerald Bay, I was 11 years old as a Boy Scout, a new Boy Scout. Emerald Bay, for those of you who don't know, Doctor's Cove is where the swim usually starts when you traverse the Catalina Channel, and Doctor's Cove and Emerald Bay are adjoining to each other. And so I was a scout at Emerald Bay for many years. And then in 1985, I went back as a staff person. And then in 86, I went back as a staff person. And I was walking back from the dining hall one night, and someone told me that someone was swimming from the mainland to Catalina Island. Now, we were on Emerald Bay for the whole summer, and while it's only 20 miles away, it's a Boy Scout camp. There's no girls, your friends aren't there other than your Boy Scout friends, and it feels pretty isolated. And so someone told me that there was someone swimming that night from the mainland to Emerald Bay or to Doctor's Cove. And I got, as a high school swimmer, I didn't even know such a thing was possible. I mean, that idea, 20 miles, is just like completely beyond the realm of possibility. So I went out to see if I could see anything, and it's just pitch black. There's nothing out there. And I sat out there for a little while, and I went, nah, I'm not going to see anything here. Sure enough, I heard the next day that someone had come and landed and then left. And that was the first trigger. That was the trigger that, whoa, this is a thing. That would be something to maybe think about doing somewhere down the line. I did not know at that time who the swimmer was. I found out later, and I think we'll probably circle back to that later, who that was. But that was it was an idea that just kind of planted in my head as going into senior year in high school that never left me.
And had you done a 1 mile open water swim at that point?
Yeah, as a Boy Scout, I actually had done some 1 mile swims. At Emerald Bay, we had a fun 1 miler that you would go around what we called uh, Indian Head Rock at the time. And then actually my first 1 miler was my first year as a Boy Scout. It was actually at Camp Whitsett, another Boy Scout camp. It was in a lake, and my buddy and I did it. And I think it probably took us 45 to 50 minutes, as 10-year-olds. And I remember cramping up and thinking, oh my gosh, we're never going to get there, but we did it. And that was the beginning, I guess, of my open water career.
And how did you pick up open water more seriously at what age?
Yeah, so I swam for a year at UC Davis, and then I took a break from swimming for 3 or 4 years. And I after graduating from Davis, I moved back to Los Angeles, where I was from, and I'd gotten a little chunky, and my mom noticed that, and she encouraged me to get back in the pool. And so I joined my master's club at the YMCA, the same YMCA that I went at. I moved back to Davis a couple of years later, and then Davis has a very famous Masters club. So I've been an active Masters swimmer for 30 plus years here. And one of the things Davis Quack Masters does, we run a 1 and 2 mile swim every year. It's a fundraiser that we do every June, first Saturday in June. So I swam that for a number of years, and also staffed it. My wife and I are still the parking coordinators for that swim, and we guide cars into the parking lot. And if I can steal a way to swim, I will. Um, we did a couple Trans Tahoes. We had some relays, and those of you who are familiar with the Trans Tahoe swim, it's the width of Lake Tahoe, and you get a team of 6 people together, and it's sponsored by the Olympic Club. So this was just kind of baby steps into the open water world. When I was about 30, there was a national 10K in Applegate Lake in Oregon, and my friend encouraged me to do that. And so that was the first real big swim. And looking back on it now, I had no business being out there. I was a pretty good master swimmer, but this was a whole different thing, swimming for 2 hours. I think it was a little more than 2 hours. And I had no idea about feeding. I had no idea about hydration. It was a really warm day. And when we got out, we were kind of standing around in the sun, and I got severely dehydrated that day. And that probably put that idea out of my mind for a while to do open water swims. But I continued my master's swimming. I've been pretty active pool swimmer back then. But the open water stuff kind of was in the back burner for a few years longer.
And then you picked it up again?
Yeah, I picked it up again. I turned 40 in 2009. You may recall, we were going through the Great Recession. I work at the university here, and we were going through some budget cuts, and they were furloughing people at work. And I thought, oh, maybe I have some time to revisit this idea of swimming Catalina. Fortunately, there was someone on the Davis Quag Masters Swim Club, Emily Evans, who had swam Catalina in 2008. So I didn't know Emily. I searched her out. I asked her what was needed. She introduced me to Forrest. Well, I can't remember Forrest's last name.
Forrest Nelson.
Forrest Nelson, thank you. And he wrote a very memorable email to me, part encouraging, part scaring me. And then Tina Neal also went to UC Davis, and I swim with Tina's sister here at the Masters Club, and Tina's brother-in-law. We've swam together for 30 years, and Tina was in town, and so she and I went for coffee, and she gave me advice on what I needed to do for Catalina. So that was in 2011. And Emily took me out to Lake Natoma, which is a lake that feeds from the bottom of Lake Folsom here on President's Day weekend, 2011. And she said, you're going to need to get used to cold water. And I went out there, and it was 46 degrees. And that was it. That was the start.
Listen, while we're on the subject, the ability of having a mentor or somebody to talk to locally is really a luxury, and it's one of the things that I think differentiates people who are successful and not successful. Just for people's reference, we have on Open Waterpedia, we have a page with people who have volunteered around the world to be mentors. They don't want any money, and they can get swimmers started who are in the middle of nowhere with no one to talk to, and they can reach out and get 1 or 2 mentors and have some friends. So continue you braved the 46 degree, and it was never going to be 46 at Catalina, but you had the bug.
Right. And actually, back to the mentorship aspect, Tina was a great resource, and I could always pick up the phone and talk to her. Emily lived in Davis at that time, and she really forced me to go out. You need to get open water, experience. And so we would leave work early, and we would get out in the lake, and it didn't matter. I would look out the window, and it would be stormy. and nothing was going to stop Emily. And we had another mutual friend, Paul Landis. We're going out regardless. Where I would have, if it was just me, and if I didn't have that mentor or someone pushing me, I would have bagged the whole thing. This whole thing actually started when I got the idea of doing Catalina. Emily and Paul Landis, who I swam with, they had in mind to swim the length of Lake Berryessa, which is our local lake here, and it's 16 miles. And I think one of the reasons that appealed to Emily is it's not something people do. It's very quiet at the other end of the lake. You actually have to take a boat up to the other end or drive up to the other end to get up there to swim from one end to the other. So Emily and Paul planned this 16-mile swim in May of 2011. So I started swimming with them in February, and we did the Berryessa swim. It was 60 miles. And again, I had no business being out there. By then I had put the deposit down on the Catalina adventure. And if I had not, I would have bagged the whole thing then. We were halfway through Berryessa and I was in pain. I was cramping. And then the worst was the next day. And actually it was about 2 weeks that I couldn't swim. My wrists were just completely shot. And at that point I had to kind of decide, okay, we're going to scratch it or we're going to double down. And I doubled down. I joined another swim club in town that had a pool that opened up at 5 a.m, and I became a regular 5 a.m. swimmer. And that allowed me to swim from 5 to 8 before work. And then I'd go out with Emily and Paul in the afternoon. And that summer of 2011, I put on a lot of miles. And so by the time October rolled around, when it was time to attempt Catalina, I was ready to go.
Before you go on to that, this idea of training in groups, I think it's so hard to train alone. And my favorite on that is when I was training for English Channel, I was carpooling with a guy. So when I got up in the morning and it didn't look, I didn't want to go. I knew he was in the car on the way to get me. And the peer pressure was just, you had to be there. And then I think the second thing is we talk about the journey from a dream to a goal. And the goal's really simple. It's when you pull out your credit card, you book the flight, you pay the deposit, you get the accommodation, then it's a goal. Then you're in there. Before that, it's a dream. It's nice. But keep going. Your attempt on Catalina in October.
That's exactly right. And Emily and I had actually a lot of swim. Berryessa is 45-minute drive from here, and so we did have a lot of time to talk, especially on the way back. On the way up, we would leave the house at 4:30 in the morning, so there wasn't a lot of talking. But on the way back, you're feeling exhilarated, and then you start talking. And actually, that was when this whole thing started. It was Catalina only. There was no notion of anything beyond that. And so I was just picking Emily's brain on what is this going to be like when I finish. And I was having a hard time visualizing that. So October 2011, October 3rd, and Emily was on my crew, and Tina was an observer. We went out to Catalina, and you have in mind how it's going to go. And based on my Berryessa swim, I'm thinking 2 miles per hour. Catalina's 20 miles. I should do this in 10 to 11 hours. And we got out to Catalina a little later. I expected a midnight start. The boat came in a little late. They were unloading the catch of the day. And so we didn't leave, San Pedro until a little later. We got out to Catalina at 1 o'clock. So right then, my head is kind of in a weird spot. We're leaving. Oh my gosh, we're leaving an hour later. But the swim went great. It was choppy. I grew up in Southern California, so I was used to choppy water. And I said, okay, this is just the ocean. And about 8 hours in, I couldn't see anything on either side. I couldn't see Catalina and I couldn't see the mainland. And you're always told, don't ask how you're doing or don't ask where you are. But I was a little confused.
And don't look, Ernie.
And don't look. Yes, exactly. And don't look. And so I asked, and Tina said, swim another half hour and we'll talk about it at the next break. And so I swam a half hour. And at this point, it was 8.5 hours in. And she said, you're halfway there. And I was just completely blown away. I thought at that point, I was at worst 3 hours away. And the idea of swimming another, 7.5, 8 hours, it just was a lot to take on. And my mood completely changed. The swim had been going beautifully. I was having a lot of fun. My crew was getting seasick, which was not great. I could see that happening. But it was amazing how that switch just flipped, and I was not prepared for that at all. I kept swimming. I swam a few more hours. I got to just over 10 hours, and Tina kind of reiterated it again. It was, I was looking at a 15-hour swim, and I was just like, oh, what do I do? And kind of treading water. And Emily, who is, I don't know if you've met Emily, but she's the nicest person in the world. She just said, you get going. Let's go. If you're going to do it, you got to get going. And I touched the boat, and that was it. I was thinking, I don't have this in me. Almost instantaneously, within an hour, I was thinking, Hoftyzer, it's only another 5 hours. You could have kept going. You're in shape. You're ready to do it. But my mind was not there. And that was a real, for the initial, I regretted it. But then, in the days that followed, I really regretted it. It was a very painful. It was almost like a loss. Here's this thing that I had been thinking about for 9 or 10 months. I failed. And it was depressing. And so immediately I'm thinking, okay, how do I, do I do this again? And one of the issues was, my wife's a teacher, and she was traditionally off during the summers. And summer of 2011, I was training the whole time. So it wasn't like she and I spent a lot of time together and went on trips and the like.
But you still
So I
remembered her
decided to
name, though, Ernie, right?
excuse me?
You still remembered her name.
Stephanie.
Yeah. Okay. You're
Yeah.
okay.
Yeah. That's right. That's right. Yeah. And so I decided to do it again in 2012, but this time I was going to do it early in the season. I was going to book the boat early. And so I booked it June 27th and went back. And Tina was great because she said, look, you're in great shape already. It's not like you need to reinvent, and retrain like you were previously. You need to maintain, and you need to be serious about it, but you don't need to do it. You've built a great base up. And so I bought myself a swim snorkel, which was great, and swimming in the pool with the snorkel kind of mixed things up. And I went back on June 27th, and I was successful, and finished in just under 9 hours and 35 minutes, 9 hours 36 minutes. And that was just exhilarating, because the goal had been in mind for 35 years, but really the last 18 months, it had been really front of mind, and to cross that off my list was very rewarding. It was great.
Take us to the Catalina banquet now.
Okay, yeah. So at some point when I was training, on the Catalina Federation website, it lists the successful crossings. And at some point while I was training, I went back and looked who swam it in 1986. Who did I, see, or I didn't see, but who was this person? And there was one swimmer who crossed from mainland to Catalina that year, and it was David Udevin. And I knew David's name. I didn't know David. But he was mentioned in Lynn Cox's book, and he's a legend, right? And so I got to the Catalina banquet, and the only person I knew there was Tina. And Forrest. Actually, I had never met Forrest. That was the first time I met Forrest. He and I had exchanged emails, but I had never met Forrest. And so I just was kind of fumbling around looking for a place to sit, and I sat down, and I ended up sitting next to David Udevin and Beth. And it was pretty amazing to say, oh my gosh, you're the one that, inspired this thing. And David was so, I don't want to say embarrassed, but just, he didn't like attention, and Beth was like, oh, that is so great, and I remember that swim. Where David was like, yeah, I think that's right. I think that was the year we did that. And it was great. It was a really neat moment, and that kind of brought it full circle. And it's amazing. 25 years after he did it, there we were, and I was able to share that with him. It was a great moment.
For people listening, there are English Channel dinners in Dover, run by the two federations. There's a Catalina event. International Marathon Swimming Hall of Fame has an annual ceremony. There are these closing ceremonies. There's an Irish long distance swimming awards, which includes the North Channel. And it's one of the ways to continue to enjoy the swim and to go from this absolutely solo sport to mixing with others who have done the same thing you've done or not done the same thing you've done, who still have it on their bucket list. And Ernie, you then caught the bug in for the Triple Crown. How did what was the trigger on Triple Crown?
Yeah, so when at that Catalina banquet, I did talk to Tom Hecker, who had been my observer on the first swim. And Tom wrote a really nice note after I wrote him before my second swim, and I said, "Hey, I'm doing this again. I just wanted to let you know." And he said, "You were totally ready last time. You know, you're going to kill it." It was a very encouraging note. So Tom and I spoke at the banquet, and he encouraged Lake Tahoe. He said, "If you want to keep going, Lake Tahoe is right up the road from you, and that's a swim that people are doing." And the next year, there was a group of us Davis swimmers that were kind of going out there in the spring, and I was feeling pretty good. And then I decided to do Tahoe. So I swam the length of Tahoe in 2012. And then I realized when you successfully swim Catalina, you get a 2-year exemption to Manhattan entry. And so I thought, oh, well, that'd be kind of a fun thing to do. So I entered Manhattan, and then you start thinking, okay, if you do that, there's one more, right, that you need to cross off the list. So in 2014, I did Manhattan, and that was interesting. We rented a place in Brooklyn. My wife and I rented a place in Brooklyn, and got there a few days before, expecting to spend, a week after the Manhattan swim in New York. And the World Cup was going on, so we were looking forward to going watching games in the regional bars and the like. And the day before the Manhattan swim, it rained, and we all got it. That was the first year that they broke the Manhattan swim up into kind of 3 swims. The year before, Hurricane Sandy had occurred, and it had taken out some of the boats that had usually supported the swim. So I think in the past they had 40 to 50 swimmers. Because there were less boat support, they cut it down to 20 swimmers. And so there were 20 of us, and we all got an email the night before saying it's rained in the city. That means the rain has flushed the city clean and it's gone into the bay.
We don't use the word flush when we talk about urban rivers.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for the clarification. But they said the water's compromised, and you can swim, or we will honor your entry for next year. And here we had flown across the country, we had rented a place. There's no turning back. And swam Manhattan, it was great. It was a lot of fun. Did that in about 8.5 hours. And the next day we got up and we went to a New York Met baseball game, and it was an afternoon game. And about midway through the game, I started feeling a little feverish, and sure enough, I had picked up something in the swim, and I never kicked it while I was in Manhattan. It wasn't awful, but it was, I had to be close by a toilet just, after any kind of food or drink. But we, gutted that out for, a week, and went home, and I went to my doctor, and they gave me an antibiotic to clear that out. So then you start thinking about the English Channel, and a Davis resident had swam the English Channel. Doug Wright is his name, and he came over one afternoon, and we were talking, and he told me he had used Fred Martle, and so I reached out to Fred, who's a boat captain, and we looked at dates, and we booked something out 2 years later in 2016. And which was kind of nice, because I was like, okay, I have 2015. I don't need to worry about, I don't have a swim ahead of me, but we'll go do that. And so that's how the Triple Crown bug kind of started. And it was really, the whole thing started, it was just going to be Catalina. But once I got into it, it was very enjoyable, and I enjoyed, feeling good. I enjoyed the social aspect of it. I enjoyed this world that I was in.
I have time for one last question. You apparently have an interesting story about your family trying to meet you at the landing place in France, which is, of course, I would have told you is a dumb idea, but tell the story.
Yeah, yeah. So we were introduced to Bob Holland from Dan Simonelli. Bob had become, and I don't know if he's still doing this, he was a driver who would pick up swimmers at the airport and take you down to Dover or Folkestone. And Bob was a very gregarious guy. And so for years we had thought we're going to try to kind of get the family over to France to watch Ernie finish. And I talked to a number of people. No one has ever, no one even heard of this, or it was not possible. Doug Wright doesn't have any pictures of when he went to France. Someone snapped a photo of him, but he doesn't have any memory of that. So Bob, we reserved Bob for a day. We arrived in Folkestone, and I said, hey, if this, I got my call that I was going to swim, and Bob was free, and he really tried to talk us out of it. But he ended up loading my wife and some friends, and my sister was on the boat with me. So my brother-in-law was in the van. And then I actually had family that was in Paris that was planning to meet us. And I started to swim, and I didn't know, am I going to see these folks on the beach or not? Because I'd heard it's a needle in a haystack. And I got to the beach, and there they were. And I had 10 people waiting for me, and great photos of family photos. I mean, my niece and nephew were there. Actually, I had multiple nieces and nephews there. So kind of a great thing that they got to see Uncle Ernie finish the channel. And my wife, saw me finish the channel. And yeah, it was great.
A warning to all listeners, do not try this by yourself at home. Now, the chances of pulling this off are really, really slim. I'm delighted it worked for you, Ernie, but the currents, particularly around Cap Grenade, are incredibly massive. So in a 30-minute period, you can go 10 miles along those cliffs over to Wissant, and no one knows. Ernie,
Yep.
I want to wrap up now and thank you very much for your time. And a couple of great lessons, which is, find a trigger, find a couple of mentors, make it a goal, put your deposit down, and then enjoy it and get sucked into every other bucket list that exists. By the way, if you do, I think one more swim in California, there's a California Triple Crown. I just don't know if you know that.
I do know that that's the only one that's out there that may happen.
Yeah. So for anybody who's found this an interesting conversation, we have another 125 videos on our channel, the iShof channel, ImShof channel, I should say, and a bunch of contacts will come up on your screen in just a second. So again, thank you very much, Ernie.
Great. Thanks, Ned.